I've now been contracting for about 9 years. Before that, I used to be a sort of VP and sort of senior level, and I realised that at that level you actually achieve very, very little. I actually worked out you can do an awful lot more by being a project manager and actually changing it on the ground. So I've become much more subversive, and I'm an awful lot happier as a consequence. So this is really, I've been building data warehouses and BI solutions for about 30 years. And the way I've done it has always been fairly sort of agile as it then became known. And I also don't turn it into analogy. I just adapt bits and pieces. So this is very much a pragmatic guide to some of the key things that I think is very important. As well as actually acting as a PM, I also have a sort of sideline as I write a lot of articles for Bloor Research. I never actually write big articles, they're all just really a blog, because I have other bugbears. Not only do I really think that agile is very important, I also think that buying solutions rather than capability is very important. I think most technology is only a capability, and most people buy lots and lots of capability and never actually see what they want. And I wrap all that up into really what I'm trying to achieve when I set about trying to improve someone. So now, why do we actually need Agile and why do we need it in BI? The thing which I notice nearly everywhere and have done for the very many years that I have been working is that most people are unbelievably busy. They're very, very busy, but they're not very productive. And what I like about Agile is it actually forces people to face up to the fact that it isn't how busy you are, it's what you actually produce at the end of the day. And part of that, if we can then be productive and we know we can actually deliver something, is actually being responsive, listening to what the business wants and delivering that, and not just giving them what we can actually, we've got on our plate, as it were. So it's about bringing our focus, it's about being much more tangible, it's about actually delivering business benefit and not just spending our time playing with toys, which I've been working in IT for sadly about almost 40 years now, and it is really, most of that time is playing with toys. I've enjoyed every minute of it. What I'm trying to do now though is actually be much more, are we actually making a big impact at the business level? We did in the early days because they didn't have anything there, and then for the most of the middle period of my career we've really just lost the plot and spent lots and lots of money and delivered very, very little. Okay, so what I'm really trying to do, I think, and the most important thing that I try and get everybody in my teams to do is to understand the all-important question, which is to go up to the business people and get them to actually tell you what is it that keeps them awake at night. If you actually do requirements gathering, because one of the things that I find is really hard job is BAs. Most BAs are very poor. They actually talk instead of listen, and they don't ask the right sort of questions. What you actually want to know from everybody is what are the things that keep you awake at night? Those are the things that we should be focusing in on. And in BI, it is all about providing answers to senior management who spend most of their nights not sleeping because they don't know what the hell is going on. So really, effective Agile, the first rule that I emphasize to everybody in my teams is that God was very clever. He gave us 2 ears, 1 mouth, very important ratio. When I actually go to meetings with my BAs, I spend most of the time kicking them because they talk, they don't listen. I find you just engage people in conversation, you ask them about, what is it about this which you really worry about? Shut up. They will then tell you for about 2 hours, they will give you chapter and verse of what they want doing. Then your job in Agile is to start to put those into priority sequence, sell that back to them, and then start to deliver it. So actually, and this is a point which I think you were making, is that it's not just about technology. So many places I go to, IT, we're doing Agile. Have you actually told the business? No, not yet. The most important person actually isn't the team, it is the product owner. If you don't have a product owner who actually understands what you're doing and is actively involved, you are going to fail. It's a different sort of failure to waterfall, but it's a failure. What you actually want to do is to get the guy who owns the problem, and you want to get them to tell you what everything about what's wrong with the thing as it stands today. And if that means that the system which you hold most dear, because you wrote it a couple of years ago, is actually a dog, you need them to tell you. And you need to put your personality and all of those things into a box and get on and fix the thing. Okay, so that is very important. The next thing, which is really hard, and this is why I think that most organisations really struggle, is they're not prepared to trust people. They won't empower them. Agile only works really if you empower a team to take on all of the responsibility. And at the present moment, I'm working for a very large mobile phone company in the west of Berkshire. They don't get this at all. We have got rigid gates. We have got 26 deliverables per gate. You have to answer every question, tick the boxes before you can move on. And I'm going, why don't you just trust me and my team to do a good job? And if we don't do a good job, sack us. And they go, no, you've got to fill out the sheet. And so to make this work, you actually have to trust the guys to go and do a good job. And the big problem is that lots of people actually think that lots of mini waterfalls is agile. So you still do analysis, then you do the coding, and then with the 1.5 days that's left out of the months that we had, we do a bit of testing at the end. That is not agile. Agile, you actually start with the testing. You actually say, what is it you want to do? How will we test that we have done that? And that is difficult for most people to do. So mini waterfalls are absolutely awful. You actually need to understand that you can't write user stories in one go. Understanding of complex things does not come from one conversation. It evolves from an ongoing dialogue, a conversation which evolves. And if you don't get that, you're not going to be agile. That's why waterfalls don't work, because that assumes that in your first conversations, they tell you everything, and then you can freeze it, and then we can spend months delivering it. It doesn't work like that. As things evolve, people evolve their understanding, and they tell you things better. So you've got to capture things at an epic level, get them to start with the big picture, and then break it down over time, and then finally end up with detailed user stories. And that may often actually not be until it's been implemented, and you go back and look at it, and they tell you what works and what doesn't work. And you shouldn't be worried if it's like that. You've got to be much more flexible. That's what Agile is really about. There are lots of things which stop you from being really effective. Before I worked for a well-known mobile company in the west of Berkshire, I worked for one in the east of Berkshire. And to be agile, you really want to stick things on the wall. We weren't allowed to stick things on the wall. We weren't allowed to have data diagrams. We weren't allowed to put up cards with our user stories because we made the place look a mess. Now, an office is not a place for people to work. It is a place where you sit and admire. What a wonderful edifice this is. That makes it really hard to be agile. In agile, you're all working at stuff. You need to show people what you're doing. You're focused on getting things through the door. An awful lot of people think that when you say you're agile, it means there's no discipline. Being agile is very disciplined. To actually be effective in agile, you have to be self-disciplined, your team has to have a rigid discipline, and you enforce it on yourselves. Just doing what you like is not agile. That is just chaos. So you have fragile, you have all those other things, but what I often see is just sheer chaos called agile. One of the other problems is that designers, and I love designers, but they really do think they know best. And they like to be up front, and they will use up most of your budget coming up with a design, leaving you no time to code and certainly no time to test. And what you actually want is to have the whole team inputting to the design, and you design as you go. And that is very difficult. And that, I find, takes one hell of a long time to get people into understanding it. Another very important thing to understand, once we have all of these ologies, and one of the things which is pretty important, I think, is Kanban, which is limiting the amount of work which you're doing, because the essence of effective agile is you're going to deliver something. As soon as somebody says, like my boss in my last job did, every day, can you just? Every more that you're doing on can you just do this means you're not focusing on what you've got to do. All of those things may be good, they go into the backlog, and you do them when you've got a time to actually prioritize them. You don't keep on adding more stuff as you go through. Agile BI is actually quite difficult to do because all the books only tell you about things like e-commerce. BI is not like e-commerce, it's very, very different, and we tend to have lots of different things. So we end up with a very long iteration 0 to set things up. And then you've got to stop the designers taking that and trying to do all of the design up front. So you're struggling. As a Scrum Master, you have to actually spend most of your time negotiating with everybody to get them to come back to what we're trying to do, which is work together collectively as a team to address the problems, and not for everybody to have an ego trip and do their bit first. The other thing is that most Agile actually works in very short sprints, and short sprints achieve very little in BI. So you often actually only have a sprint and you haven't got much to deliver. But that's still good, because as long as you keep on showing people what you're doing, you stay on the right path. Another problem we have is an awful lot of it's in the data warehouse, and data warehouses are not exactly sexy things that you go and display to the end user. But it's very important that you do find ways to actually show what you're doing and engage everybody all the way through. So you've got to be innovative. And it's remarkable that even one of the things about BI is your audience is often actually very senior management, and you'd often think they would be the people most capable of describing what they need. Unfortunately, they're not. And you've got to try and take their half-baked ideas, turn it into something, and deliver it. That is why I've always done quite a lot of Agile stuff, because even something as simple as a dashboard, you try and get somebody to tell you what their KPIs are, and that's like a lifetime's job. So it's very, very difficult to get people to articulate things. So you are going to be iterative. You are going to have to be flexible. So that's why I think Agile is important, but I would never stick rigidly. You've just got to adapt all the way through to what you see that your customers can take, your team can take, the environment can take, but don't drop back into the old ways of working. So what we're trying to get is a real focus on business outcomes, ignoring as much as we can the technology. The technology is only there as an enabler. And we've got to recognise that often very simple things can actually have the biggest impacts. Very often as technologists, we always want to spend loads of money on doing something really, really sexy. Very often, if you actually sit and listen to the business long enough, you'll find what they want is actually very, very simple. So don't go and try and persuade them to build pyramids when all they really want is just a little maisonette. Just listen. Focus on quick wins is very important. The quicker you can actually deliver something and show it to people, the faster they will forget about all of the nice to haves. And the essence of effective Agile to me is once you've got that communication going, get something working, put it in, and then stand back and allow them to actually forget about all of the gold plating, get them to start to think about what the next thing is they want in some other area. And that way you add loads and loads of value and you don't get bogged down into this traditional waterfall thing of about 80–90% is useless 2 or 3 years later. And an effective team learns that best is not as good as the quickest. I spend the whole of my life telling my teams that if you can deliver this quickly, that is absolute value. If you can't do it quickly, but you can do it cheaply, then that is great. And only when we can't do any of those do you tell me about best. Best is the anathema of Agile. And that, I think, must be where I finish, which hopefully was 10 minutes. So that was as per normal. When I speak, a load of jumbled ideas. But any questions on anything which is related to it, I'm more than happy to take.
I've got 10 questions. So you mentioned that product owner is a particularly important role when implementing Agile. So why do you feel it's such an important role, and how would you assess?
If you don't have somebody from the business who really understands what you're supposed to do, you have intermediaries, you will always deliver the wrong solution. You actually need to have somebody who really gets it. So at TechTalk, I actually delivered a local loop unbundling system, and we spent 3 months arguing we needed the guy that actually did the spreadsheets to come and work with us. If he hadn't have worked with us, we would have delivered the wrong solution, because what his boss asked us to do was entirely different to what he wanted us to do. In the end, we delivered that solution, and it saved them about £120 million a year for a 6-week project. That is why. Mr. Watkins, sir.
So, one of the big parts of a data warehouse is getting data from the source systems. that can often be a long, protracted process. How do you incorporate that in the Agile?
Iteration zero. That is very much why up in iteration zero, we spend an awful lot of time actually talking to the source systems and documenting them, and we don't start building until we have actually acquired data. And that is why I actually say that we can quite easily spend 3 months in iteration zero, and we shouldn't start building until we've acquired the data, profiled it, and made sure it's accurate. Otherwise, we're working with garbage. So, yeah, very big problem.
Right, just a quick one. So, data warehouse by its nature is hugely complex. You're talking about product owner being the key role. How do you identify a product owner?
Okay, this reminds me of many years ago, I was being interviewed by IBM to be the head of data warehousing for Northern Europe. And I'd gone through 5 interviews, and this was the final interview. And I sat there with the guy, and he was saying, well, how do you deliver a data warehouse? And I said, with teams of 5 people. And he said, what do you mean? I said, yeah, 5 people, never any more than 5 in one subject area. And we build something for 3 months, we walk away, and then we go and do something else. He said, we usually have 250 people on site, and we don't show them anything for 2 years. So I said, I will get my coat at this stage. So the only way to build these things effectively is you break it down into small bits, and you have to have an owner for each bit. And then you have to have, this is where designers and architects, so I told you I do love them, fit in, because they provide the glue which fits it all back together again. But the individual areas you actually need to be very localized in what you're going to do. Otherwise it's an impersonal solution and it will be inadequate. Because very much, I think that Agile is actually about effective communication. That's what we're really trying to do.
So I'm building a data warehouse right now, and we haven't had a really long iteration zero. We've actually got stuck in. And as we've built the warehouse, we've found all the data quality issues as part of actually iterating through to the solution. Do you think that's a reasonable approach, or?
It depends on where you're sourcing your data from. Dave and I work in telcos where virtually all of the data comes from third parties. Right. And if you leave it until you actually got it into the data warehouse, you have spent millions of pounds and it is a recipe for disaster. Because we're dealing with third parties, you've got to actually get that contractually agreed before you build. But if it was in-house, and I have built some data marts in-house, we've done it that way as well. And that's why I always think you have to be flexible, never be dogmatic.
Thank you, Harrison.
Okay. Cheers.